The Iran-Israel conflict has entered its fifth day with no signs of de-escalation. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz warned Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei to stop launching missiles at Israeli civilians or risk a fate similar to Saddam Hussein's. Israel says it still controls Iranian airspace and may intensify strikes soon. Here's what the Israeli Defense Minister has said.
אני מזהיר את הדיקטטור האיראני מהמשך ביצוע פשעי מלחמה וירי טילים לעבר אזרחי ישראל. כדאי שיזכור מה עלה בגורלו של הדיקטטור במדינה השכנה לאיראן שהלך בדרך הזאת נגד מדינת ישראל.
In the latest development, the Israeli military confirmed it killed Iran's wartime chief of staff, Ali Shadmani. In precise strike in Tehran, Shadmani was a top military figure and close to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Here's what the Israeli army spokesperson had to say.
לילה, בעקבות מודיעין מדויק שהתקבל באגף המודיעין, חיסלנו את עלי שדמני, רמטכ"ל המלחמה, המפקד הצבאי הבכיר ביותר של המשטר האיראני. הוא חוסל במפקדה של המשטר האיראני בלב טהרן. שדמני שימש כרמטכ"ל הכוחות המזוינים של המשטר האיראני, והאיש המקורב ביותר למנהיג איראן עלי חמינאי.
Earlier in the morning, 2 explosions were also reported in Iran's northwestern city of Tabriz near a major Air Force base. Meanwhile, overnight Israel struck missile sites, UAE facilities, and air defenses in western Iran overnight. A strike on Tehran's state broadcaster killed 3, and the Natanz nuclear site was hit, destroying nearly 15,000 centrifuges. Iran retaliated with missile attacks on Tel Aviv and Haifa, killing at least 8 people and damaging homes and a power station. Iran claims its drones destroyed strategic targets in Israel overnight. Oil prices jumped over 2% on hopes for a ceasefire. Till now, over 700 foreign nationals, including Indians, have fled from Iran to Azerbaijan and Armenia since Israel's airstrikes began. Evacuations continue as tensions escalate across the region. On the global front, U.S. President Donald Trump demands a real end to Iran's nuclear ambitions, not just a ceasefire. Speaking from Air Force One, Trump said Iran must give up entirely on nuclear weapons. He hinted at possible talks, sending Vice President J.D. Vance or envoy Steve Witkoff to Iran, depending on developments. Trump warned Iran against attacking U.S. forces, saying the response would be gloves off. Let's have a look at what the U.S. president had to say.
We're doing pretty well. Right now, we're doing pretty well. Remember, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. It's very simple. We don't have to go too deep into it. They just can't have a nuclear weapon. I don't know. I've been negotiating. I told them to do the deal. They should have done the deal. Their cities have been blown to pieces. They've lost a lot of people. They should have done the deal. I told them, do the deal. So I don't know. I'm not too much in a mood to negotiate.
EU Commission President Kaja Kallas stressed urgent de-escalation through diplomacy, affirming that Iran must not acquire nuclear weapons. She vowed the EU would play a key role in reducing tensions. Here's what Kaja Kallas has said.
We all agreed the urgent need for de-escalation. Iran cannot have a nuclear bomb, and diplomacy is the solution to prevent this, and EU will play its part. I also took note of the support of the EU ministers on the European Union and my involvement in the de-escalation, so I will spare no efforts in this respect.
Jordan's King Abdullah called the escalating conflict a threat to regional stability, citing dangers from misinformation and ongoing wars in Ukraine and Gaza. Let's have a look at what he said.
New security threats, unprecedented technological acceleration, rampant hypercharged misinformation, and a raging war in Ukraine and a cruel one on Gaza. And now the attacks on Iran, which threaten a dangerous escalation of tensions in my region and beyond.
Now we have guest joining us, Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst. He's joining us live from Taiwan. Thank you, Ross, for staying with us for this story. Could this fifth day of conflict tip over into direct confrontation between the U.S. and Iranian forces, especially in proxy regions like Iraq or Syria?
Clearly, President Trump is reluctant to get involved in a war with Iran, and I think Iran understands that, and hopefully Iran will be very careful about attacking any U.S. assets in the region. The U.S. has troops, has military bases in numerous countries in the Middle East. Iran and everyone else knows where they are. It's not a secret. But notwithstanding U.S. support for Israel, I think it would be extraordinarily foolish for Iran to attack U.S. interests in the Middle East and bring the United States into the war.
And could Defense Minister Qadd's comparison of Khamenei to late Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein escalate the rhetoric into wider regional instability?
Not at the moment. I mean, this is a battle between Israel and Iran. So just like it would be foolish for Iran to attack United States interests in the Middle East, it would be very foolish for other organizations to join the war, whether that's the Houthis in Yemen or Hezbollah in Lebanon, which was basically defeated by Israel last year. So the smart thing for other countries to do is to encourage Israel and Iran to reach a ceasefire, but to stay out of this and not take sides in a military way. And again, from the same logic, it would just be very foolish for Iran to attack U.S. interests, because if Iran were to do that, the United States would hit back very, very hard.
And with Trump demanding a full end to Iran's nuclear ambition, is there any realistic diplomatic path forward? And how likely is that Iran's leadership will interpret U.S.'s statements as a prelude to regime change intentions?
The United States, or the Trump administration and their negotiators, have offered a very reasonable arrangement to Iran, which would be to enrich uranium for civilian nuclear power uses outside of Iran by an international consortium with transparency about how the materials are used once they reach Iran. And Iran has rejected that. I think that's extremely foolish of the Iranian leadership. If what they say is true, and they're not pursuing nuclear weapons, and they're only pursuing civilian nuclear power, then what's wrong with having an arrangement where the uranium is enriched outside of Iran and having full transparency? So this is very much up to Iran. And, they're the ones who are secretly pursuing nuclear weapons research and development. We know they're doing that. The recent IAEA report was very clear about Iran obfuscation and hiding information about its nuclear programs. So it's very much up to Iran. They could take that deal from the United States. Trump would declare a victory. Israel would cease its attacks. And Iran could move on and deal with their own economic and internal political problems. But if this continues, we know Israel's position, in fact, the position of many in the United States as well, that it's time for regime change in Iran. I'm skeptical that Israel's military action in the interim would bring about that kind of regime change. But again, if Iran were to accept the United States offer to use uranium that's enriched outside of Iran, the sanctions would come off and Iran would be much better off.
And now moving to a bigger picture, how might Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE adjust their position as the U.S. hardens its stance against Iran?
Publicly, the Gulf states have to say that they oppose Israel's military action, but we know for a fact that the Gulf states do not like Iranian leadership. They don't like Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons, and they're probably happy that Israel has done this. They'll never say so publicly, but we know how they feel about Iran. Even if Saudi Arabia and Iran have patched up relations in the recent period, they're still very cautious and skeptical about Iran's intentions. So frankly, they're probably happy about what Israel did. And how do we know that? Well, they haven't stopped Israel from overflying their countries. We don't see Saudi Arabia or Jordan being vociferously angry about Israel's Air Force flying through those countries' airspace to attack Iran.
And Building on that, is the current trajectory of the conflict reshaping the strategic alliances in the region, and where do key actors like Russia and China fit in now?
I think it's a little too early to tell what kind of reshaping of the strategic arrangements in the Middle East that this war will occur, keeping in mind that there are countries like Saudi Arabia that was in negotiations via the United States to recognize Israel, but then the war in Gaza erupted and it's put on hold at Saudi Arabia's recognition of Israel. So separate from the war in Iran, there's still the war in Gaza and the civilian deaths, and a lot of countries in the region are, of course, very angry with Israel over the amount of civilian deaths, even though those countries also dislike Hamas and wish Hamas would just surrender and go away. As for Russia and China, there's been talk in recent days about some role for them, and maybe Russia could be influential because it has a good relationship with Iran. It used to have a good relationship with Israel, but Russia has been angry at Israel's periodic statements of support for Ukraine, and Israel has certainly not taken Russia's side, even if it hasn't always been vociferous in its criticism of Russia. As for China, they're still figuring out what their strategy in the Middle East is. They were instrumental in the Saudi Arabia-Iran rapprochement, but historically they haven't been a major player in politics. They've been more interested in doing business in the Middle East. So I think it remains to be seen what kind of political role they could play. And frankly, I wouldn't be optimistic that they can negotiate between Iran and Israel.
Thank you very much, Ross Feingold, for joining us today and bringing